Welcome to Human Monsters. April 26th, 2018. Joseph Paul Moore is a cattle rancher in Park County, Colorado. On that day, his friend Patrick Frazee said something to him that stopped him in his tracks. They started off as friends, and when Joseph caught sight of Patrick's ability as a ranch hand, he offered him a job. Something had changed within Patrick. It wasn't immediately apparent to Joseph. It didn't arise when the men were alone together. There was a side of Patrick that emerged when he was in the company of his girlfriend, Kelsey Berreth. In November 2016, Kelsey helped Patrick move some calves on Joseph's ranch. Kelsey was experienced in her own right, but not with calves, and Patrick was impatient and frustrated with her. Commenting on this, Joseph said, "Of course, I've lost my temper, too. It happens. But I would never talk to anyone the way Patrick spoke to Kelsey. He yelled at her, cursed at her, and berated her just terribly." Joseph saw Kelsey with Patrick on one other occasion. It wasn't even apparent how close they had become, though Patrick did refer to her as his girlfriend. One day Patrick opened up a little more to Joseph about the nature of his relationship with Kelsey. As Joseph noted, "Then one day, Patrick turned to me and said, 'Kelsey was pregnant. Not is pregnant, but was pregnant.' I just stopped and looked at him. There was something in his tone of voice and his choice of words that let me know more was coming. It was kind of like the whine of an artillery shell in one of those war movies that you hear before the explosion. Finally, Patrick said to me, 'I didn't even know she was pregnant. Not until she was giving birth. Now, I've got a little girl.'" Another disturbing exchange emerged one day while they were shoeing horses. Patrick looked over at Joseph and said he was having trouble with somebody. From there, he went into a spiel about missing children. He said, "Kids go missing from playgrounds and schoolyards all the time." Joseph probably wasn't listening to any true crime podcasts, for he wasn't keen on exploring this subject matter any further. He said, "You should never say anything like that. Stop talking like that." Patrick smiled assuringly and said, "Don't worry, I'm only kidding." The preceding exchange was not the only conversation of a disturbing nature between Joseph and Patrick. A few months later, Patrick told Joseph he met a hitman in San Francisco. Though Joseph was no criminal mastermind himself, it struck him as odd that a career criminal, like a contract killer, would be so open about what he does that he would tell anybody he met, even a tourist, about the fact that he commits murder for a living. Joseph was convinced that Patrick was putting him on. He began watching Patrick a little more closely. One day while the two men were running bowls, Joseph noticed that Patrick was scowling. Bypassing that issue, but approaching it indirectly, he said, "How are things going with Kaylee's mom?" He referred to her as Kaylee's mom instead of Kelsey because he knew Patrick hated it when Kelsey was referred to as Kelsey, as if that development weren't troubling enough. Patrick turned to Joseph and said, "I figured out a way to kill her." This really threw Joseph for a loop. He needed a moment to process that statement. Whether or not Patrick was joking that time, Joseph was not amused. He said, "Don't even talk about things like that. Get that shit out of your head." Patrick laughed. He said, "Hey, if there's no body, there's no crime, right?" November 22nd, 2018. Kelsey was happy. Possibly happier than she had ever been. She texted her boss to let him know that her fiancé would accompany her to the company Christmas party. Knowing that she could count on the companionship of Patrick, and that she would have her baby girl, Kaylee, in her life, brought about this feeling of unfettered joy. Kelsey had gone to pilot school in Washington State, but moved to Colorado after meeting Patrick online and falling in love with him. She told her friends that she and Patrick never fought. Her friends assumed she was being facetious. Kelsey told them that if ever they did have a disagreement, it was never heated enough for the neighbors to hear. Not all was well in paradise, however. Patrick's mother did not approve of his choice of partner, and was not shy about vocalizing her displeasure. She even insulted Kelsey, calling her things like prostitute. Still, Kelsey didn't let that blemish what was otherwise a fairy tale in the making, or at least that was how she felt about her life at the time. There were other problems in Patrick's family. Patrick and his sister were engaged in a legal battle over their father's estate. His sister Erin called Kelsey to ask her questions about her life with Patrick in hopes that she would acquire some information that her lawyer would consider to be incriminating. Kelsey didn't fall for it. The way she saw it, she, Patrick, and Kaylee were a family, and she wasn't going to let anybody break that bond, even if they were blood relatives of Patrick. November 22nd, 2018. Patrick's mother Sheila was hosting the family Thanksgiving dinner as usual. Patrick's brother Sean, who was a police officer, brought his wife and children. He was estranged from Patrick, and it was no wonder, since they had very little in common aside from their lineage. Patrick called the house's landline to inform his mother that he would be late for dinner. Sean hated that. He was typically serious, as policemen tend to be, and he hated tardiness, especially when it came to an occasion like a family Thanksgiving dinner. Sheila neither condemned Patrick's actions, nor did she defend them. She said to Sean, "He says he will be here as soon as possible, and he's bringing little Kaylee. How about Kelsey?" Sheila, smiling, rolled her eyes and said, "No, Kelsey will not be here." Patrick Frazee had a mistress. Her name was Crystal Lee Kenny. Like many mistresses, she knew he was in a relationship and decided to stick around in hopes that the tides would turn in her favor one day, and he would choose her. Even though he was engaged to Kelsey and had a child with her, Crystal would not give up her hope that she would one day be Patrick's one and only. Crystal was a nurse. She was asked by Patrick to clean up a mess at Kelsey's condo. He didn't explain what the mess consisted of, but it didn't take her long to surmise what had happened. He told her to, quote, "Look for a tooth that might have fallen down an air vent." The implications were morbid, but Patrick didn't sound shaken or rattled. He came across more as cold, calculating, and authoritative. It was vintage Patrick. She did what he asked of her, as usual. Vintage Crystal. As soon as Crystal stepped across the threshold into Kelsey's home, she could tell what had happened. After all, Patrick had asked her to kill Kelsey on 3 different occasions. He was insinuatingly dictatorial. There was some method to the madness, since she was one person who wanted Kelsey out of the way. Had he done it himself? Dealing with bloody injuries was hardly a new experience, given her history as a nurse. She approached the scene as a professional, putting on a hairnet, latex gloves, a white coverall suit, and booties over her shoes. It looked like a hurricane of blood had struck the unit. It was on the windowsill in the kitchen. It was on the oven. The refrigerator was blasted with streaks of blood. Even the dishwasher was hit. Kaylee's stuffed animals were drenched with blood that had yet to dry. Cushions on the sofa were soaked red. Crystal knew Patrick had a temper, but she didn't believe he was capable of something like this. She wondered if she was going to be next. Crystal cleaned the unit from top to bottom. She used Windex and a line of bleach so powerful it caused her to tear up. This wasn't the only reason she was crying. It was also because she knew that a murder had happened in the home. She threw out the sofa cushions and the stuffed animals because there was no way they would ever be entirely cleansed. Once Crystal left Kelsey's condo, she got a text from Patrick. He asked her how she was doing. She told him she was nearly finished. He texted, "Good." He said he wanted to meet up with her so they could talk. It was one occasion when she was not elated by the prospect of getting together with Patrick. She wondered what he had in store for her. She hadn't cleaned the scene of the crime as well as Patrick would have liked. There were some tiny spots of blood here and there. Crystal knew getting involved with Patrick in the first place was wrong. She told a friend this in 2006. Her friend said, "Weren't you already married?" Crystal shrugged, took a sip from her beer, and said, True, and I got pregnant." "I had no idea. What did Patrick think? Did you talk about getting married?" "Ha! Not even close. He told me to get an abortion. And I did." After her friend processed this for a moment, she said, "So, you dumped him, right?" Again, not even close. "Oh, we didn't see each other as often as we used to. I was hurt. There's no doubt about that. But still, I could not say no to that man." Wow. "He told me a few years ago that I should get divorced and maybe we could get together. Maybe, right? You got the divorce a couple of years ago." "Yeah, but by that time I'd lost touch with Patrick. I hadn't seen him for a while. Guess he gave up on me." "But you're back together now." "Yeah, just my luck. Ran into him last year, and we picked up where we left off." It was true, after everything Patrick told her to do, which completely upended her life. She was still the other woman. December 1st, 2018. Kelsey's mother, brother, and father went to Kelsey's condo to see what was going on in her life. They had tried to get in touch with her by phone, but she hadn't answered for days, and that just wasn't like her. Cheryl always thought something was off about Patrick. He wouldn't move in with Kelsey. Her parents offered to pay for a ranch, but he was adamant that the patriarch of the family should be able to finance such a thing himself. They were also alarmed when he threw a temper tantrum at the hospital after Kaylee was born. She was born premature, and the doctors told Kelsey and Patrick that she could not receive visitors until her immunity was built up. Patrick was enraged, saying that it was vital for infants to bond with their parents. At one point, a social worker put Kaylee into foster care out of concern that he might be abusing Kelsey. A year later, on Kaylee's birthday, he was joking about how angry he was that day, going on to say he should have killed the nurse who informed him he would have to make himself scarce. Kelsey's mother, Cheryl, always felt uneasy about Patrick, citing the aforementioned reasons as the criteria. When Cheryl walked into Kelsey's condo, she could tell immediately that something was not right. For one thing, the heat had been turned up. One might only leave it warm enough to prevent the pipes from freezing. Also, there was a plate of cinnamon buns in the kitchen that were rock hard. Cheryl recalled that Kelsey told her she was making them Thanksgiving morning and would be bringing them to the family dinner. Cheryl also noted that the entire place was cleaned, but that it was obvious that it was done amateurishly. There were streaks on many surfaces. Everything, not just floors and surfaces, had been wiped down. It appeared as though somebody was trying to hide something, to scrub it away. In the bathroom, Kelsey's makeup kit and toothbrush were on the counter. If she had just gone somewhere, why hadn't she taken those items with her? Cheryl was still reluctant to contact the police because of the fact that Kelsey might just have gone traveling. There was always the possibility that she might come back. Cheryl spotted a framed photo of Kelsey and Patrick. She turned it over, face down. Cheryl decided to contact Patrick to see if he knew something. It was bound to be an awkward exchange. Cheryl never approved of Patrick, and Patrick's mother didn't like Kelsey. Kelsey stayed at his mother's home, which Patrick was sharing at the time, and she only stayed there overnight on one occasion. And when she came downstairs in the morning, Sheila unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse, calling her, among many things, a hooker. Cheryl didn't like speaking to or sharing the same zip code with Patrick, but in this situation it seemed necessary. When she called to find out where Kelsey was, he said, "I'm not sure I could be much help." Cheryl conveyed her state of disbelief at that statement. There was a long, pregnant pause. He was so quiet for so long that Cheryl wondered if the call had been dropped. Finally, to break the silence, he said, "We're not together anymore. I don't think she would even want to speak to me." Cheryl responded to this with silence. After a moment, she said, "But she never said anything to me. We talked Thanksgiving Day, and Kelsey was totally happy about her life. She never gave me any hint that you two had split up." "Yeah, well, that's the way it is." Realizing this conversation was going nowhere and had outlived its limited utility, she said, "Well, could you at least call her, reach out to her, and make sure she's okay?" He apparently didn't feel this statement deserved to be dignified with a response, for he returned her request with more icy silence. Cheryl said, "Come on, Patrick. You haven't seen her for a couple of weeks, and neither have I or anyone else. Please just call her today." "All right, but I have to take care of my cows first." So, now Cheryl understood where Patrick's loyalties lie. Kelsey's brother Clint was as much a friend as a sibling. They grew up isolated on a farm, so they only had each other for age-appropriate playmates. They would still get together for coffee as adults. He was as frantic as Cheryl after Kelsey disappeared. He accompanied Cheryl to Kelsey's home on the day of the search. At one point, he came running from the bathroom, distraught. He said nothing to Cheryl. He only grabbed her by the hand and led her to the bathroom. Once in the bathroom, Clint hoped that Cheryl would see what he had seen. The room was sparkling clean, but he had clearly spotted some kind of anomaly. He was hoping that he was just seeing things. He wasn't. Cheryl spotted some blood. Tiny, dry droplets of it on the toilet. There was more of the same in the bathtub. It struck them both that someone would clean the condo so thoroughly elsewhere, yet overlook such conspicuous drops of blood. Cheryl realized there was no alternative way to interpret the situation. Kelsey was missing, and she was most likely in danger or had already become a victim. December 2nd, 2018. Soon after Cheryl called Woodland Park Police and shared her concerns about Kelsey's whereabouts and well-being, Corporal Dina Curran called Patrick. After some opening small talk, Curran said, "You are aware, then, that Kelsey Berreth is missing?" "Of course. Cheryl called me a few days ago and told me that she couldn't find Kelsey. I guess Kelsey wasn't replying to any of her texts or phone calls." And she wanted to know if I'd seen Kelsey. And had you or have you seen Kelsey? I mean, she is your fiancée, right? A classic Patrick silence. Though Curran had just met Patrick over the phone, after years of interviewing suspects, you come to recognize aspects of tone and body language that can indicate that somebody is hiding something. It's not something you can submit in a court of law as evidence, but it's something to build on as you assemble your case. Finally, Patrick said, "We were engaged, but we aren't anymore." "Really?" "Yes. We had a real heart-to-heart before Thanksgiving." Another pause. Curran was very patient, and she could tell something was not quite right with Patrick. He went on to say, "We just agreed that this relationship wasn't working. I mean, my mother doesn't like her at all, so it was always tense when Kelsey was around my family, and we just come from different backgrounds." He went on to explain that they hadn't simply had a lover's quarrel. It was over. He returned all of Kelsey's possessions that she left at his place. He gave back the key to her apartment, an extra car key, and a handgun. That last detail, the gun, caught Curran's attention. She said, "Have either of you been depressed because of the change?" Patrick insisted that Kelsey hadn't been depressed. As for his own feelings about the situation, he said, "I'm feeling fine. Sure, this has been tough, but it's part of life, isn't it?" Curran said, "How'd you meet?" Patrick took a long and audible breath. "On the internet, a dating app." "So, you haven't seen or heard from Kelsey either?" "No, absolutely not. I sent her a text November 25th. I'm looking at it on my phone now. Can you tell me what you wrote?" After a pause, Patrick said, "I wrote, 'Do you even love me?'" Another of Patrick's pauses. This time he wasn't willing to fill any dead air, so it was incumbent upon Curran to do so. She said, "Fine, we'll be in touch." After she hung up, she contemplated how dispassionate Patrick had been. His engagement had just been broken, and his fiancée might have died, and he was remarkably composed. That just didn't sit right with Curran. December 4th, 2018. Enter Ray Sebring. He was Kelsey's boss at Doss Aviation. He told Cheryl that Kelsey hadn't been to work for several days. He tried getting in touch with her, but received no replies. As he scrolled through their text messages, he found that the last one he received from Kelsey was on November 25th. He read one aloud. "Hi, Ray. Sorry for the late notice, but I won't be able to make it in this week. I need to go see my grandma, who is sick." Cheryl knew that neither of Kelsey's grandmothers were ailing at that time. He also got a message from Kelsey on Thanksgiving Day. He read it aloud. "Hi, Ray. It was a great day. Happy Thanksgiving to you, too." Ray said, "I should have realized something was wrong right then, and especially when I got the second message." Clint said, "Kelsey never calls in sick?" "Oh, sure, she does. People get sick. But look at this. Kelsey never puts a comma after my name in a text. She always uses an exclamation point. And no smiling faces. You know, the little yellow emojis. Kelsey always put those in her texts to me. Why wouldn't she do that with these texts?" The last time Cheryl heard from Kelsey's phone, it was after she called it by accident. She got a text in response. "I'm tied up. I'll call you later." Cheryl told Woodland Park Officer Beth Huber that according to Patrick, it was a very amicable split, including their decision to co-parent Kaylee. Cheryl said to Huber, "But Kelsey never once told me that she and Patrick were fighting or having problems, and she would have." Officer Huber tried calling Kelsey's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. Huber officially designated Kelsey a missing person with Cheryl's consent. The police had searched Kelsey's condo looking for signs of foul play, but beyond the drops of blood, there were none. They went back and entered into the evidence trove an iPad, a notebook containing passwords, and a receipt from Safeway. According to the receipt, a purchase was made on November 22nd at 12:22 p.m. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation became involved. Agents Greg Slater and Kevin Torres decided to examine two vehicles. The vehicles in question were a 2006 Toyota Corolla and a red Chevy Silverado pickup truck. They were registered to Cheryl and parked in Kelsey's driveway. Slater requested a thorough search of the property and the vehicles. In addition, he asked for a dog to sniff out human remains. He spoke with Cheryl as part of this investigative effort. She said, "Kelsey has never run away or disappeared like this. Even when she was younger, she never ran away from home?" "Never, not once." "What about her mental state? Any depression?" "Kelsey was just fine the last time I saw her. She never gave me any clue that she and Patrick were having problems. She was happy and looking forward to the holidays." "But you have been getting texts from her phone?" "I don't think the texts we've been getting from Kelsey's phone have been from her." "Why not?" "The sentences were all wrong. Kelsey always writes her texts in complete sentences. These messages were all incomplete sentences with lots of abbreviations that Kelsey never used. You know what I think? I think Patrick's got her phone and he's sending those messages. What do you think happened? I am afraid my daughter is dead. Lucy, the police dog, found nothing noteworthy in the Chevy pickup. However, it was a different story with the Toyota Corolla. She smelled something around the back corner of the driver's side. The agents descended upon the vehicle to see if there were human remains to be found. Sure enough, there was a bloodied sock on the front passenger seat. That was it, nothing else incriminating in the vehicle. Lucy didn't find anything in the condo that hadn't already been detected. Officer Huber contacted Verizon to get a look at Kelsey's last known cell phone activity. It was on November 25th at 5:13 p.m. The ping indicated the location was Gooding, Idaho. 2 hours later, she sent a text to Patrick's phone. Huber contacted the police department located in Gooding, Idaho. It turned out the last location where Kelsey's phone was used was a steep gorge, not the kind of place where a person such as herself would retreat to make a phone call. It was puzzling. As one officer put it, if you believed Kelsey had been in that gorge, you'd also have to believe she'd made a phone call, waited a couple of hours, sent out a text, and vanished. December 4th, 2018. Patrick's brother Sean agreed to meet with Patrick. Sean noticed Patrick was very uneasy. He was fidgety and paranoid. Sean's experience on the force endowed him with the kind of radar that could detect culpability. Patrick certainly came across as somebody who was in trouble. Normally, Patrick never proposed that they get together, so that in and of itself was anomalous. Another notable development was a strange phone call Sean had with Patrick the previous day. Patrick said, "Kelsey's missing." "Kelsey is missing? What do you mean? When was the last time you saw her, talked to her?" "You know we broke up, right?" "No, you never mentioned that." "How long? When did you guys split? If you've broken up, how did you know Kelsey is missing?" "Her mom called me. Cheryl said no one has seen her since Thanksgiving." "Thanksgiving? Well, didn't you see Kelsey when you picked up Kaylee?" "Her grandmother's sick. I know that. Maybe she's gone to visit her." "Wouldn't her mother have known that? Wouldn't Kelsey tell her that she was going to visit her grandmother?" "Well, you know Kelsey's been drinking again. She's drinking way too much, just like before." "Like before?" "Oh yeah, you didn't know? Kelsey's got a definite alcohol problem." "So maybe she checked herself into a rehab program, but just didn't tell anybody." "She's in trouble at work too. Doss Aviation called me and said Kelsey's health insurance is about to be canceled because she hasn't been showing up for work." "Okay, well, let me know. Let's just pray that Kelsey is found alive." Sean said goodbye. Something was very wrong on Patrick's end of the line. As the brothers stood in the parking lot, Sean was about to question Patrick about Kelsey going missing when a Woodland Park police car pulled up. Sean recognized the officer and they shook hands. The officer turned to Patrick, and after a few pleasantries, he said, "Patrick, we need your phone." Patrick took 2 steps backward and said, "What?" The officer took 2 steps toward him and repeated the request for the phone. "Your phone. We need your phone. You know why." Patrick took another 2 steps back to give Sean some room to intervene. Sean asked the officer if he had a warrant. "No, I don't have a warrant, but we do plan to get one." The officer looked from Sean to Patrick and then back to Sean. "Right now, this is more of a request than a demand, but I won't be just asking if I have to come back again." Sean said, "Patrick, give the guy your phone." Patrick was reluctant, but he reached into his pocket and handed the phone to the officer, taking the long way by handing it around Sean. The officer made out a receipt for the phone. Once the officer had driven completely out of sight, Sean said to Patrick, leading him by the arm, "Come on, let's get out of here." They got in their cars. Patrick drove off right away. Reflecting on that incident years later, Sean said, "You can't just be a cop 40 hours a week. When you're on the job, you're always on the job." At the time, he thought to himself, "Something's going on here. I just hope it's not what I think it is." December 4th, 2018. Patrick was not in a position where he could be without a cell phone. There was one call in particular that he was required to make. It was urgent. He was in his truck and headed toward the ranch of Joseph Paul Moore. After pulling up, he approached Joseph and said, "I need to use your phone. Got to talk to someone about some horses." Joseph didn't hesitate to lend him his phone, even though it was peculiar since Patrick usually had a phone of his own. Joseph even walked a few paces away to give Patrick some privacy. Though he didn't catch most of what he was saying, he did hear him say, "If I get arrested because they've taken my phone, I'm going to have my friend here to call you. It will be from this number, so come and get these horses." The party on the other line was saying much more than Patrick, and Patrick appeared to be quite agitated by what he was hearing. Having ended the call, he handed the phone back to Joseph and said, "Thanks, buddy." Patrick got back into his truck and drove away at the same rate of haste with which he arrived. Joseph couldn't help but wonder what was going on in Patrick's world. He thought, "None of my business," but then again, maybe it is my phone after all. He clicked on Settings and then on History. It indicated Patrick's call was 5 minutes and 58 seconds. Joseph wondered, who'd he call? This was also none of his business, but having delved into the matter that deeply, he couldn't help prying further. Though he didn't recognize the number Patrick dialed, he did recognize the area code. Joseph thought, 208. That's Idaho. December 5th, 2018. Patrick Frazee went to the Ent Federal Credit Union in Woodland Park. He and Kelsey had accounts there. He told a teller that he wanted to speak to the manager, her being Patricia Key. As soon as Key approached Patrick, he said, "Is it possible to get a copy of what your surveillance camera recorded on November 22nd? "Why would you want that?" "You know who I am?" She nodded. Patrick said, "Well, I used the ATM that day, and I need to get a copy of the tape to show the police where I was." Patricia didn't reply at first. Patrick took a step in her direction. He said, "That way I can prove that they should stop thinking of me as a suspect." Patricia was still stunned into silence. Patrick said, Kelsey's disappearance." He took a step toward her. She took a step back. He said, "See, I know Kelsey called her mom, Cheryl, November 25th. Finally, Patricia said, "That's odd. Why would you need to show the police what you were doing on November 22nd? if Kelsey had talked to her mom 3 days after that. Patrick was infuriated. Patricia recalled the police contacting the credit union to ask about Kelsey's recent banking activity. She became concerned that Patrick was about to become violent. He said, "I never said anything about Kelsey calling her mom." 3 days later, or on the 25th, Patricia said, "Okay, fine, but I'm afraid I can't give you the tape. You see, we erase it at the end of every week and use it again." He balled his hands into fists. Patricia was even more tense now. He stormed out. He punched the glass door so hard, Patricia half expected it to shatter and fly off its hinges. She watched as he marched through the parking lot in a huff, opened his truck's door, and slammed it shut. Only then did she feel safe. When she returned to her office, she took up the business card a Woodland Park detective left with her and dialed his number. When he answered, Patricia said, "You aren't going to believe who was just here." December 6th, 2018. A forensic specialist conducted a chemiluminescence test. It revealed traces of blood that were not visible to the naked eye all around Kelsey's condo. Despite the best efforts of whomever was tasked to clean up the scene, these chemicals detected blood on surfaces all throughout the condo, from floor to ceiling. With this, and the observation of Patrick Frazee and his short temper, the case was now being investigated as a homicide. December 11th, 2018. Patrick Frazee walked into a Woodland Park Verizon store, and it was immediately apparent to the clerk, David, that he was in no mood for pleasantries. Patrick's opening line, "You know who I am, right?" David nodded. Patrick said, while looking from left to right, "Well, don't believe everything they say about me, okay?" "Sure." Patrick asked David if he could change the PIN number on a phone that was part of his Verizon account. David said, "No problem. Can I see your phone?" "Well, I don't have the phone with me." "The phone's not here?" Patrick looked around the room and shook his head. The last thing David ever wanted to say to Patrick was no. Still, he needed the phone in order to change the PIN. He said, "But if you bring it in the next time, I'll be glad to take care of that for you." Patrick was on edge when he entered the store. Now he was downright frenetic. He said, Okay, here's something else." He leaned across the counter closer to David. "If I had a busted-up phone, if it was broken or, let's say, damaged, like someone had smashed it up with a hammer, just for instance, could you get any information off the phone, like a call record or something?" David didn't respond. This was a tough one. Along with everybody else in town, he knew about the disappearance of Kelsey Berreth and that Patrick Frazee was a person of interest. Patrick had more. I mean, could a phone ever be so busted up that you could never get any records like that off it? David excused himself to go to the washroom and stayed in there longer than usual in hopes that Patrick would take a hint and leave. After a few minutes, he heard the front door open and close. After leaving the washroom, David called the police. He said, "Patrick Frazee was just here." After he told the officer the story in full, the officer said, "You can expect a call from one of the district attorney's office investigators tomorrow. Tell him what you told me." David hoped Patrick wouldn't return before the police showed up. December 12, 2018. Investigators confirmed that the blood found around Kelsey's condo matched her DNA profile. Cheryl was informed. Now the best case scenario was that Kelsey was just missing. Given what evidence had been gathered and the intel accumulated through interviews with Cheryl and Patrick, a search warrant was issued for Patrick's home. Of all the items the officers were seeking, one of them was a copy of the movie The Wizard of Oz. The reason? On November 22nd, 2018, the last day Kelsey Berreth was seen alive, Patrick's mother posted a quote from the movie on her Facebook account that went, "Yay, the witch is dead." December 14th, 2018, 8:30 a.m. The police pulled up while Patrick was feeding Kaylee breakfast. Officers from the police, sheriff's office, the FBI, and the CBI had arrived and intended to comb through Patrick and Sheila's home top to bottom. The officers also brought dogs. 11 a.m. Patrick and Kaylee were driven off the property in a sheriff's office's SUV. Patrick had been communicating with the police through his attorney, but he presented himself as cooperative while they were searching in the house. He provided a DNA swab and allowed them to swab his cell phone. He said he welcomed the search because it would eliminate him from the list of suspects, if it even was a list. Among the items collected as evidence: receipts, including a Walmart receipt dated November 22nd at 1:50 p.m. Phones, a Verizon LG tablet, 59mm rounds, 2 shell casings, ATM receipts indicating 5 deposits and a withdrawal, a handwritten document sealed in an envelope that read, approximately 12:30 p.m., pick up Kaylee. Meet and exchange from parking area at her house. Approximately 12:45 p.m., ent bank deposits. Approximately 1:30 p.m., leave Walmart. Drive 40 miles to check on feed and water for the cattle. Approximately 2:45 p.m., feed, water, check on cattle. Approximately 3:45 p.m., drive home for Thanksgiving dinner. Approximately 4:30 p.m., get home. Swabs from a Swiffer green mop, a bleach bottle, a container of Simply Green cleaning solution. The last 3 items bore traces of blood. One of the more notable items found was an envelope containing 4 teeth. One of the dogs found a 5th tooth in a burn pit. There was a list of people who had Patrick's consent to request medical care for Kaylee, were Patrick to be unavailable. Kelsey was conspicuously absent from the list. Crystal was sitting across from 3 FBI agents. She figured she wouldn't give herself away as long as she was calm. Patrick told her what to say, and they had rehearsed it. In response to one of the agents, she said, "When was the last time I talked to Patrick on my phone?" "I'm not sure." Another agent said, "We need to know." The third agent said, "Why don't you remember?" "Hey, there's been a lot on my mind." She smiled. None of the agents smiled back. She said, "I could look at my phone. That would show us for sure." The first agent said, "Why don't you just take a guess?" After a moment of contemplation, genuine or not, Crystal said, "Okay, it must have been a month or maybe even a month and a half ago. We haven't spoken on the phone for a while." So, how is your memory about the 24th of November, Crystal? Another agent said, where were you that day? Okay, the 24th was a Saturday night. The FBI agents nodded. Then I was at Patrick's place all day. All day? Another agent said, from when to when, approximately? From about 9 to 5. And Sunday I went back home. I drove all night to get back to Utah. What time did you get home? Oh, I don't know. It must have been about 10:30 or 11 in the morning. And how did you drive home? What roads did you take? I took I-70. That's the way I always go, through Salt Lake City. Patrick gave you a cell phone to get rid of? Told you to toss it away in Utah? Oh no, he did not give me a phone to toss. You drove your car? Oh no, I borrowed my friend's car. Nice friend. What kind of car? Huh? You know, what kind of car? Make, model? Oh, I don't know anything about cars, but it was black. Okay, Crystal, let's talk about Kelsey Berreth. You knew her, right? Oh no, I never met Kelsey. You never met Kelsey? Nope. Never? N-O. No. Never. I didn't even know she existed until I started reading the stories about her disappearance. But you knew Patrick had a daughter with another woman? Sure. And you never thought, even once, to ask the man you love to tell you the name of the mother of his child? December 16th, 2018. Crystal told Patrick that though she hadn't exactly aced her FBI interview, she had stuck to the story they'd devised. She told him, they've got nothing on us. No worries. She was mistaken. A call detail analysis from Patrick's cell indicated to the agents that he'd been talking to someone who was using a cell phone with an Idaho area code. It was the phone Crystal was using those days. To quote one agent, and wouldn't you know it, they're talking on the phone right around the time Kelsey went missing. Despite Crystal's claim to have been at Patrick's house all day, the phone records showed that she had spoken to him over the phone 3 times during the morning and twice in the afternoon of November 24th. The agents discussed the matter of the cell phone records of that day more in depth. The records show Ms. Lee's phone traveled back to Idaho on November 24th and 25th. And it turns out that Crystal's phone was connected to exactly one tower and sector near the Colorado-Utah border. So, Crystal's phone was connected to that tower at 4:13 a.m., 4:17 a.m., and 4:23 a.m. on November 25th. Guess whose phone was connected to the same tower way out in the middle of nowhere? Patrick's? Nope. Kelsey's. What? Right. Crystal must have been carrying Kelsey's phone on November 25th. She told us she never met Kelsey, so the two of them couldn't have been in that black car together, right? Nobody was with her. Crystal must have been packing Kelsey's phone. We've got her. Hold on, this is even better. During the time Crystal said she was driving back home to Idaho, we can prove she was talking to Patrick on her phone, the 6679 number, and that's the time that Kelsey's phone goes dead. No more activity after that. The records also indicated that Crystal discarded her phone and bought a new one on December 4th, which was the same day agents seized Patrick's phone. Crystal didn't get rid of the phone as soon as she could have. She used that phone to speak with an FBI agent about the case. Now it was proven that not only did she know more about the murder than she let on, but that she committed perjury. The agents decided it was time to bring Crystal Lee in for another interview. Megan Garrison was a friend of Crystal Lee Genny and was known to have had some contact with her around the time Kelsey Berreth went missing. FBI agents interviewed Megan about her relations with Crystal at that time, and after discussing how they had swapped cars, which they had done before, Megan dropped this nuclear bomb into the investigation. Crystal told me that Patrick wanted her to kill Kelsey. What? Yeah, 2 or 3 times. He said he wanted Kelsey dead, and he wanted Crystal to do it. So I went out to the car. I keep a gun there. I always keep 8 rounds in the magazine, but never leave one in the chamber. So I go out to the car, get my gun, and find 6 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. There's no way I left my gun like that. Not a chance. Michelle Stein was interviewed by FBI and CBI agents at her home in Twin Falls, Idaho. She revealed that Crystal told her Patrick wanted to kill his baby's mother. An agent said, "Did she mention the baby's mother by name?" "No, we'd talked about Patrick having a daughter before, but Crystal never named her." "You weren't interested?" "Crystal will talk when she wants to talk. Pushing her never does any good." "Must have shocked you when she said that. I mean, when Crystal said Patrick wanted to help her kill his baby's mother." "It sure did, but it didn't seem like Crystal was all that bothered by it." "No?" "No, I mean, it was more like Crystal just needed to talk about it, like, God, I hate to say this, but maybe Crystal was just trying to figure out if she should help Patrick, and if she did, how they should do it." "Any chance you remember when you had this conversation?" "Sure, October 22nd, last year." "And you remember this so exactly. Why?" "I was driving my son to a doctor's appointment when Crystal called me." "You talked about this on the phone from your car?" "Absolutely." The agents knew the next major task was to obtain a warrant for Michelle's phone, but for now they didn't want to disclose the significance of what she had told them. Instead, one of the agents asked her what she told Crystal next. Michelle said, "Oh, I told her to go to the police right away. I said there was no way she could keep this kind of thing between her and Patrick. Crystal, you have to call the police. That's what I said." They asked Michelle for permission to probe into her phone records, and it was granted. Sure enough, the computer records indicated that the call Crystal made to Michelle on the dates given by Michelle were made at that time. Still, they didn't have a body, so none of the aforementioned data would get an arrest. One agent said, "It's time to talk to Crystal again. She's got a lawyer now. Maybe she's ready to talk." "Yeah, but are we ready to do a deal with the devil?" December 20th, 2018. The FBI got together with Crystal and her lawyer for an interview. One of the agents was keen to get started. He said, "Do you believe that Patrick killed Kelsey in her home?" "Yes." "Why? Because of the mess you had to clean up?" "Because of that, yes. And because Patrick had told me at least 3 times that he wanted to kill Kelsey." "Why would he want to murder her? Wasn't Kelsey the mother of his baby girl?" "Patrick said that Kelsey was abusing Kaylee, physically abusing her. He said Kelsey had even hit Kaylee with an iron. Patrick has been talking about killing Kelsey since September 1 time. He told me to buy a cell phone that couldn't be traced back to me. He called it a burner phone. He said If I had a phone like that, we could use it to leave a false trail for the cops, and they wouldn't know I had killed her. Kelsey, I mean. Did Patrick Frazee ever actually tell you that he wanted you to kill Kelsey Berreth? Oh, yes. He said I should put poison in Kelsey's coffee. She loved her Starbucks. Did you do it? Well, one time I did buy her a Starbucks and took it to her house, but I didn't put any poison in it. Just rang the bell and left it on her doorstep. Patrick said that would be okay because people go missing all the time. Then, another time, Patrick gave me a metal pipe and told me to kill her with that. No, really, he gave me the pipe. Did you take the pipe? And did you plan to kill Kelsey Berreth? I did take it, but I couldn't do it. So the next day, I went back to Patrick's and gave him the pipe back. Did he ask you any other time to kill Kelsey? Yes, about a week after he gave me the metal pipe, and I brought it back. He told me to take a baseball bat over to Kelsey's house and, quote, start swinging. After I used the bat, Patrick said I could just drag her body out to the dumpster or figure out some other way to get rid of it. But you couldn't do it? No, I did go to Kelsey's house, and I had the bat, but I just sat on the curb across the street from her front door. All I could think about was how I'd gotten into this mess. Did you tell Patrick you couldn't do it? He was very angry. He stomped and stormed and said that he must have a bigger heart and care more about Kaylee than I do. But then November 22nd, Patrick called me and said I needed to clean up a mess at Kelsey's condo inside her house. An agent said, "And you went to Kelsey's home?" Yes. You went to Kelsey Berreth's home expecting to find what? What did you find? There was blood everywhere. It was on the ceiling, the walls, the furniture, even on a child safety gate. I'd never seen anything like it. But you weren't really surprised, right? No. Patrick told me everything he'd done. Crystal described methodically how she cleaned Kelsey's home. She said, Patrick even told me to look for a tooth. A tooth. He said he told Kelsey they were going to play a game. He put a blindfold on her and started hitting her with a baseball bat. And he said he'd knocked her teeth out. Patrick said he'd picked up the teeth he could find, but he was afraid he'd left one of her teeth behind, and he wanted me to look for it. And did you look for it? Yes, I found the tooth. The root was still attached to the tooth. It hadn't broken off. Patrick knocked it right out of Kelsey's head. But knowing all of that, and seeing what you had found in Kelsey Berreth's home, you did not call the police. No, sir. You not only failed to notify authorities of what you had found and the fears you had that Kelsey had been murdered, you also spent 4 hours cleaning and washing away all the evidence. But I left you clues. I left blood on the toilet and on the rock facing around the fireplace. Didn't you find it? I left you clues. You didn't find Kelsey's body, correct? Yes, that is correct. Did Patrick give you any idea what had happened to her body? Not for a couple of days. But he did tell you, correct? Yes. Patrick told me where the body was 2 days later. Kelsey's body. Yes. And he said he needed my help again. The following offers a more detailed description of Patrick Frazie's attack on Kelsey Berreth, according to Crystal Lee Kenny's story. Kelsey was so loyal to Patrick that one day when he told her to sit down and wrapped a sweater around her face, she didn't object. He told her it was a game in which the objective was to correctly guess the scent of some candles he would light as she was blindfolded by the sweater. The game sounded like fun to Kelsey, so she served herself up to Patrick. The couple were a classic alpha-beta combination, with Patrick as the alpha male. Kelsey was so passive and agreeable, she could never bring herself to say no to him. Also, she was turned on by his domineering personality. He was also physically imposing, standing at 6 foot 2 inches tall and 205 pounds. His years of hard physical labor at the ranch endowed him with a muscular physique. Though she was not a pushover in general, Patrick could always prevail upon Kelsey. She was 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds. He could dominate her if she let him, and she did let him. After the sweater blocked her vision entirely, Patrick left the room. After a moment, Kelsey could smell a candle's aroma. It had a tranquilizing effect. It was during this moment of vulnerability that Kelsey heard Patrick draw a large breath. Then she felt a painful blow. Accompanying the pain was nausea. She felt like she was on the verge of vomiting. It felt as though she would feel better if she retched. Kelsey was short of breath and struggling to regain it. She was also overwhelmed by an excruciating pain in her head, neck, and shoulders. She couldn't figure out what had happened. There was no indicator at that time of what Patrick had done to her. She felt a tiny pool of liquid in her ears. Tears were running down her cheeks at about the same volume. She wet her pants. She fell forward to the floor and began to crawl. She felt like she must move. The sweater tied to her head was drenched in some kind of liquid. It fell from her head. She looked upward beyond her shoulder and froze at what she saw. Patrick was brandishing a baseball bat. He was holding it aloft, right above her head. Patrick seemed possessed. His face was red. Veins were protruding from his neck. His arms, hands, and shirt were soaked with blood. Knowing she was unable to fight back, Kelsey was left with no alternative but to wave the white flag. She said, sobbing, "Please stop." This did nothing to diverge Patrick from his course. Kelsey whispered one more time, "Please stop. Please." Those were the last words Patrick Frazie would ever hear from Kelsey Berreth. December 21st, 2018. It was on that day that Crystal Lee showed the investigators on Patrick's property where she and Patrick disposed of Kelsey's remains and of some items that had been brought there from her condo. Once this was done, Patrick felt they had effectively washed their hands of the whole affair, feeling that you can make culpability disappear once you've gotten rid of a body. Before they disposed of her body, he kept it in a tote bag in a barn on a property he was renting for grazing rights. After the fact, he said to Crystal, "It was the best solution. I got this into the barn 2 days ago. The tough part was carrying this bag up on the ladder and getting it on top of the hay. But I knew once I had it up there, nobody would find it." After Crystal loaded wood into a fire pit at Patrick's behest, they lit Kelsey and her belongings on fire. As Crystal told this story to the agents, Patrick's mother appeared in the window. When Crystal saw her, she panicked, nearly falling to the ground. Crystal accompanied the agents to Patrick and Sheila's house again. Crystal feared the prospects of Patrick being acquitted. Would he track her down and punish her? Kill her, maybe? Look what he had done to Kelsey. The agents found some blood spots on the bale of hay Crystal told them Kelsey's body had been tossed on. Still, this was only circumstantial evidence. Nevertheless, after all the intel they had gathered, they decided it was at least time to approach a judge about getting a warrant to arrest Patrick Frazee. December 21st, 2018, 8:40 a.m. Agents from the FBI and CBI arrived at the Frazee homestead with a warrant for Patrick Frazee's arrest. He was suspected of first-degree murder and solicitation of first-degree murder in the assumed disappearance of Kelsey Berreth. He would eventually receive an additional charge, that being tampering with a deceased human body. Patrick was taken to a county jail and booked. September 2019. Patrick met with his attorneys. At one point he said, "I gave you a long list of people who will tell you about Kelsey's drinking and my good character." Patrick, we spoke with everyone on that list. There's not a soul who doesn't think you were capable of murder. And not one person had a bad thing to say about Kelsey. Why do you think the prosecution turned down our overtures to them about a plea bargain? They believe this case is very winnable. Making air quotes, Patrick said. What about justice? His attorney made the same air quotes when using the word justice, when he said, "Justice is only a concept, Patrick. When we go to trial, there are only two possible outcomes, winning or losing. I expect to win. We pled not guilty because we want to go to trial. I think we can knock plenty of holes in the prosecution's case. All we have to do is convince one of the jurors of reasonable doubt, and you walk away from this a free man. And if not, then I am afraid we are looking at life in prison without parole." Another lawyer said, "Of course, we will appeal if it comes to that." Patrick said with more air quotes, "We are looking at life in prison? No, man. I am the one looking at spending the rest of my life in a dump like this. It might be all about winning and losing to you, just another point on one side or the other of a scorecard. But if I lose, you go home to your wife and kids. I spend the rest of my life watching Kaylee grow up through a set of prison bars." February 1st, 2019, 2 p.m. The trial of Patrick Frazee had begun. The odds weren't entirely against him. Law enforcement officials still hadn't determined whether she was dead or missing. The prosecutor opened with, "This is the case of a cold, calculated manipulator. This man is a killer." She told the jury that Patrick poisoned people's minds, pursuant to the objective of turning them against Kelsey. The prosecutor said, "The defendant was telling everyone he could, including Crystal Lee Kenny, that Kelsey was not only a bad mom, she was also an alcoholic who was abusing their baby, little Kaylee. He even told some people Kelsey had abandoned their baby and left the little girl with him." The prosecutor also mentioned that Crystal had been asked by Patrick to murder Kelsey 3 times. Commenting on the state of Kelsey's home after the murder, the prosecutor said, "There was blood on the walls, on the couch, in the kitchen. There was even blood on Kaylee's toys." She showed the jury as a slide presentation photos of the bloody items in Kelsey's condo and still images from Patrick's appearances in security videos on dates that were significant to the case. Now for the defense's opening statement. You will see that the prosecution's case is like a beautiful house built on a foundation full of cracks. You just heard the raw and unedited version of their case, but you are going to see that their facts don't make sense. And you know what? You will realize at the end of this trial that their facts prove Patrick had nothing to do with the disappearance of Kelsey Berreth. The prosecution's case relies on the testimony of a woman who took a plea bargain. It will actually prove that Patrick could not have been the one who's involved in Kelsey's disappearance. Let's consider the testimony of Crystal Lee Kenny. The prosecutor told you that Ms. Kenny found a blood-soaked scene inside Kelsey Berreth's home. Everything was soaked in blood, right? Remember now, you hear this from a woman who agreed to testify against my client, but only in exchange for receiving next to no time in jail for a crime she admits she committed. She only spilled her guts after the prosecution realized they wouldn't have a case without her and did this deal. Their facts prove my client murdered Kelsey Berreth? Absolutely not. Remember, I promised you their so-called facts would actually prove Patrick Frazee could not be involved with Kelsey's disappearance. You don't believe me? Well, think about this. Their most crucial witness will say she found Kelsey's condo bathed in blood. Blood was everywhere and on everything. It took her 4 hours to clean it up. The prosecution has also shown you photos of my client entering and leaving Kelsey's house. Remember those pictures? You saw my client at the front door. Then again, you saw him leave the house. Here's the critical thing to remember. My client, Mr. Frazee, didn't change his clothes. Patrick was wearing the same shirt and jeans when he left the house as he was when he went inside. I ask you if the condo was as blood-soaked as Miss Kenny claims, and if Mr. Frazee had indeed viciously beaten Kelsey Berreth to death with a baseball bat. Why weren't his clothes a mess? Did Patrick Frazee, coming out of that house, look like a man who just beaten a woman to death, striking her so hard that he knocked out 5 of her teeth? No, he did not. When my client left the condo, he wasn't sweaty, his hair was not disheveled, and his clothes were not bloody. How could he possibly have committed this alleged crime and not gotten even a speck of blood on himself? November 7th, 2019. The previous day was a difficult one for Crystal Lee. She was the star witness for the prosecution, and they depended on her to tell the truth. She knew Patrick Frazee better than the defense, and the jury, for that matter. Part of her testimony. He told me that he only used her for what she was worth. Patrick said she'd run errands for him and do things like cooking, cleaning, moving hay, and feeding the horses. He wanted me to kill Kelsey, but I couldn't do it, and I told him I would not do it. I would not kill Kelsey. She went into detail about Patrick's scheme to murder Kelsey, the method, date, and time, and how he forced Crystal to clean up the scene. On this date, she was testifying again. She talked about how difficult it was to be questioned by the FBI and CBI. She said, "But a year ago and today, I knew I had to tell what I knew because I just couldn't live with that secret buried inside me. The jury was shown footage of Crystal showing investigators where Kelsey's body was burned and her description of the cleaning of the scene at Kelsey's home. Once the tape ended, Crystal wept. The prosecutor asked her where Kaylee was during the murder. Crystal said, "Patrick told me she was in her jumper in the back room as he hit Kelsey with a baseball bat." The prosecutor introduced into evidence the black tote bag that had been found in Patrick's pickup truck. Crystal said, "The baseball bat he used was in that tote." The prosecutor showed her a faded red gas can. She said, "Have you ever seen this gas can before?" "Oh my God, yes. That's the can Patrick used to start the fire." After a lunch break, the prosecutor questioned Crystal some more. "Are you here testifying today because of your plea agreement with the district attorney's office?" "Yes, I do have an agreement with the district attorney." "In the agreement is to plead guilty even though you know you will receive a prison sentence." "Yes, that is true. Again, I am testifying today, telling the truth, because I just couldn't live with this secret." Patrick's attorney cross-examined Crystal. He shed light on the fact that she pleaded guilty to a fourth-degree charge of tampering with evidence, which is the least serious felony ranking in Colorado. Having entered that plea, Crystal effectively confessed to moving Kelsey's phone to confuse investigators. His attorney said, "You have not pleaded guilty to cleaning up a crime scene, a murder scene, nor have you admitted sending messages from Ms. Berreth's phone or actually destroying the phone. You could have faced much more jail time if you'd been convicted of those charges. Isn't that correct? We should also point out that you have not been charged with being an accessory to murder. That is a Class 4 felony. The penalty would be much more severe if you'd been convicted of that crime. Isn't that correct?" He probed into the 3 occasions when Patrick asked her to kill Kelsey. She admitted that she came close to killing her. His lawyer said, "Wouldn't that be attempted murder? And 3 attempted murder charges could mean as much as 144 years in prison. If you didn't reach this agreement with the district attorney, you must realize that you would be faced with spending the rest of your life in prison. You did know that, didn't you?" "No, I didn't know that." 144 years in prison. And what will you receive for your guilty plea in this case? Your worst case scenario is only 3 years in prison, isn't it? Yes, this is true. Yet, you say you're here today because you couldn't live with what you knew. That's right. The murder of Kelsey Berreth bothers you tremendously today, doesn't it? Crystal nodded. But why didn't it bother you enough to warn Kelsey or her family or pick up a phone and call the police any of the 3 times that you say Mr. Frazee wanted you to kill Kelsey? Where was your sense of truth and justice, your understanding of right and wrong, when you walked up to Kelsey's front door with a poisoned latte? Or the time you had a baseball bat in your car driving back to Colorado? Driving to Ms. Berreth's home, you had a baseball bat in the car. You didn't think you were going to a softball tournament, did you? I am telling the truth. Isn't it the truth that you are telling us precisely what you need to say to avoid spending the rest of your life in prison? I have been telling you the truth. I have told the truth for the last year. I see. You were telling the truth today, and have been for the past 10 hours. It just so happens you have also been telling us what you need to say to stay out of prison. November 15th, 2019. Jacob Bentley was an inmate in county jail at the same time as Patrick Frazee. At one time, they began passing notes back and forth. The content of the notes pertained to Patrick's case. In prison, the code observed by all inmates is that the only good snitch is a dead snitch. Well, Bentley was now free, and he submitted the notes to the prosecutor. What's more, he agreed to testify. Inmates who are accused of murdering women occupy a position in the offender hierarchy just one rung above pedophiles. So Jacob Bentley wasn't going to lose any sleep about his contribution to the case. The content of the notes was examined by the prosecutor, and they were damning. Patrick asked Jacob if he could use his gang affiliations to have District Attorney Dan May, members of the FBI and CBI, and Crystal murdered. Others were listed as targets. He would end every note with "flush when done." Chad Lee, Michelle Stein, Joe Moore, and his partner Wendy Clark and Cheryl Berreth also had targets on their backs. He wrote, "They all need to disappear unseen till at last November 22nd, after the trial." As an addendum, he wrote, "Wendy Clark is the cash cow. Joe has all kinds of shit to sell." A message he wanted forwarded to his mother went, "All the horses are taken care of," or have her tell me if the elk hunt was successful. He closed with, help me please, man. I repay however. My life and my little girl's life depends on you. Throw me down your plans, ideas." In another note, he wrote, "Do you have funds or resources to go to Idaho and back? Was thinking if you could cap 'em in the desert." He also asked Jacob if his gang friends could dispose of the bodies in the desert. In another missive, he wrote that he had no choice but to kill Kelsey because she herself tried to hire a hit person. He wrote in a message, "I'm not the monster they say I am. I don't know what happened or where she went. Any advice on how to defend my innocence?" Jacob said Patrick promised to bond him out of jail if he arranged the murders he requested. Jacob said, "I acted cordial with him whenever we talked, but obviously I wasn't going to kill anyone for him. I didn't want to go back to prison." Patrick's attorneys had some sugar for this guy's gas tank. "Isn't it true that you first came to my team, the attorneys representing Mr. Frazee, with this information? However, you wouldn't show us the letters and refused to talk to us about the evidence. That's true, isn't it? As a matter of fact, wouldn't it also be accurate to say you never talked to prosecutors about this information until Monday night of this week?" Jacob stonewalled him on that one, reacting as if it were a rhetorical question. Patrick's lawyer continued, "You know, this case has attracted national and international attention. Mr. Frazee is now a famous man because of this trial. Mr. Bentley, have you ever considered making money from these letters? Maybe listing them for sale on eBay?" Jacob admitted he considered selling the letters, but he decided, quote, "to do the right thing and testify. You were facing a felony charge, isn't that right? If convicted, you might have gone to prison for 30 years. Did that factor into your thinking?" Jacob confessed that he anticipated getting a better plea deal if he cooperated with the investigation. He went on to say, "But when I talked to the district attorney's office, they surprised me. The charge had already been dropped to a misdemeanor. Both the prosecution and defense rested their cases. November 18th, 2019. The prosecutor's closing argument. We all wish Kelsey Berreth had walked through that door right now, but that's never going to happen. She argued that the reason Patrick went to the credit union and Verizon store was to create verifiable alibis. The prosecutor also pointed out that the defense's theory that Kelsey committed suicide didn't hold water since she was seen with Kaylee on the Safeway monitor on Thanksgiving morning. Cell phone records also indicated that Patrick was not working with horses at the time of her disappearance, as he claimed. The attorney said he finished her off because she was a problem to him. Patrick's attorney reminded the jury of the importance of reasonable doubt. He also noted that Crystal Lee's testimony, being what the prosecution relied upon, weakened their case, since the timeline didn't add up. He also pointed out that there was no video footage of Patrick entering Kelsey's condo with a baseball bat, nor was there a black box seen in his pickup. He also mentioned that no blood was found on Patrick's clothing or in his washing machine. He also pointed out that none of her neighbors in the well-populated neighborhood saw Patrick approach her home that day. His lawyer pointed out that it would have been a better idea if he were to kill her, to do it in the middle of nowhere. 2:45 p.m. The jury filed back into the courtroom after deliberating. The judge said, "Will the defendant please rise?" Patrick stood. He was found guilty of all charges. Patrick sat down. The judge asked Patrick to stand again. The judge said to him, "Kelsey Berreth spent the last night of her life caring for you, and you viciously beat her to death the following day. After you beat her, you burned her body like it was trash. Kelsey Berreth was a wonderful mother, beloved daughter. Your crimes deserve absolute maximum punishment, and I intend to do that." Patrick Frazee was sentenced to life without parole. The judge added an additional 156 years and 5-year terms for the solicitation charges. This is Prosecutor Beth Reed's assessment of Patrick Frazee's character. I think, based on my observations of Patrick Frazee over the last year, that there is a potential that Patrick Frazee's behavior is consistent with a sociopath. And that's a person who has basically an inability to feel empathy with other people. Crystal Lee was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her role in the murder. Kelsey's daughter, Kaylee, is being raised by her grandparents. That is, Kelsey's mother, Cheryl. Prosecutor Jennifer Veman said this about Kelsey: "The killer took a shining light from the earth. She mattered. Kelsey mattered." Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.